So, are you able to hear me now?
Yay!
Nice job, tech guy. That's the like under pressure, under the gaze of everyone. That's hard to do. Liz, thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you all for joining me here today. It's just wonderful to be with you. I grew up in Manhattan, and my heart is still there. So it's nice to see you all and to be with you virtually, at least.
Well, thank you for accepting the invitation.
Oh, my pleasure. My absolute pleasure. So Liz asked me a few questions to get me started brainstorming what to say today. And they were great questions, really prompted a lot of thoughts. And she wanted me to talk about my early years in Manhattan and what formed me as a competitor and what kind of helped prepare me for the Olympics and what didn't prepare me for the Olympics. And I have to say right away that sparked memories of some of my brightest, happiest memories of childhood, which center on the city pool in the city park in Manhattan, Kansas. I'm sure many of you have been there, and I know it's a lot different than it was when I was a little kid. My family moved to Manhattan from Topeka in 1972. And my parents signed me and my older brother up for the Manhattan Marlins swimming team right away. My dad, Richard Seaton, had been an all-American collegiate swimmer at Harvard. And when I was growing up, I wanted to be just like my dad. So at the age of 7, I was thrilled to join the Marlins swimming team. And I immediately fell in awe of all the older girls on the team. They were Annelle McKee, Helena Erasm, Ann Fields, Judy Fan. I'm pretty sure all of their parents taught at Kansas State University. I learned so much from those girls about leadership and teamwork and just hard work. But honestly, I think the competitor in me started to form much earlier, growing up in Topeka under my older brother's guidance. And I'm not sure guidance is really the right word for it, but my older brother, then known as Dickie, now Richard Holton Seaton Jr., as a lawyer practicing alongside my dad in Manhattan, was a very outgoing and dynamic boy, and I followed him everywhere. In fact, I was known as Me Too in my younger years, because whenever he would say he was going to do something, I would say, Me too. And one of the earliest memories I have is of going out to climb the tree in our front yard in Topeka with my brother. Dickie brought the ladder to the tree and suggested I go up first because if I fell, then he was bigger and he'd be able to catch me. So I climbed up, and of course he took the ladder down and started laughing at me because now I was stuck in the tree with no easy way down. And then all of a sudden we heard a city siren go off, and we thought, oh, that must be the 5 o'clock siren. It goes off every night. And then we realized, oh no, we've already heard the 5 o'clock siren. That's a tornado siren. So my brother ran into the house and left me in the tree with no easy way down. And so, I kind of pondered up there for a little while what my options were. And eventually I just decided I had to jump. And I'll never forget limping into the house to find my family around the table eating dinner. And my brother had told my parents that he was pretty sure I was over at my friend's house. And I have so many similar memories of experiences with my brother, which are this weird mixture of fun and fear and adventure. And one thing is for sure, he made me tough. He helped me form that core of stubbornness and self-reliance that every athlete has. When we swam on the Manhattan Marlins together, my brother was a really good swimmer, but it turned out that I was a little bit better. I'll never forget 1 or 2 years into our swimming careers, at the age of probably 8 and 11, we had just finished a swimming meet in Salina, I think, and we were getting into the family car, and I had won 5 medals, and I was stunned to discover that my brother hadn't won any. And I remember taking immense pleasure in dangling my medals in front of his face. And I just thought, this is an activity I can really get behind. And I just cherished my Marlins jacket. I cherished my teammates. I loved racing and practicing with my friends. And it's funny, I remember telling some of these stories to my Olympic rowing partner, Stephanie Maxwell Pearson, who grew up in New Jersey. And we won a bronze medal together at the Olympics in Barcelona. And she told me that she'd had very similar dynamics with her older brother. And she also attributed her athletic toughness to growing up with him. And just for example, one of her most vivid stories was of the day he put all of her, well, maybe it was just two of her favorite Barbie dolls in a toy car, doused them with gasoline and lit them on fire and sent them down the driveway slope. So nice guy. So I found rowing when I went to college at Harvard. The same year that I started swimming with the Marlins in 1972, Mark Spitz won his 7 gold medals at the Olympics. And my dad and I watched all those races together. And Mark Spitz was such a hero to me in my younger years. I had his poster up in my bedroom with all of his 7 gold medals across his chest. And I always dreamed of going to the Olympics as a swimmer. But by the time I'd swam through high school, and by the time I was on the swimming team at Harvard, I was just completely burned out on the sport. I had really peaked as a much, probably honestly had reached my peak as a 14-year-old, and just kept competing against these times and only seeing very tiny incremental improvements. So it just wasn't fun anymore. And I quit swimming after my freshman year and happened to find the sport of rowing. And much of the training that I'd done for most of my life as a swimmer translated into this new sport, and I was able to quickly excel. And the year I took up rowing in 1984, the women's Olympic rowing team was actually training out of our college boathouse. And I was just in awe. They were the first Olympic athletes I'd ever met and seen in person, and I started formulating this dream about going to the Olympics as a rower instead of a swimmer. But I was small compared to most Olympic rowers. My pair partner Stephanie was closer to the average size of rowers at 5'11" and 180 pounds. I was 5'8" and 145, so I was definitely considered small. But I think those early lessons or challenges or whatever the right word is from my brother really helped me overcome my size limitations, because somehow he taught me to look past those apparent limitations, to believe in myself, to know that even though someone was bigger and stronger than me, that I could draw on my own internal fire and do better. So here's an example that kind of helps illustrate that. When I was in college, my rowing teammates and I would often run stadium steps as a standard workout. And that's like at the football stadium, and the steps, which are actually the seats, are about 2 feet high. And you'd run up about 20 of those, 20 steps, and there were, I think, 40 sections. So it took about 30 minutes, and it was a really hard workout. And we would often do that. The coaches often seemed to think that that was like a good warm up for whatever the next workout was. So I had a good friend who had in college who'd been a lacrosse player in high school, and she was a really excellent runner. And in my sophomore year, when I started rowing, I'd follow Jen up the steps, and she'd set the pace, and I would just try hard to keep up with her, basically. But when junior year came, we were running the steps that fall, and I realized I was holding myself back just to kind of maintain the order of what we expected. I was limiting myself in order to preserve our expectations. It was a crucial moment of decision for me. I really remember it vividly, because I had to decide, am I just gonna stay here and work within these kind of perceived limitations, or am I gonna go around her? And I decided to go around her. And it wasn't an easy decision, but I'm glad I made it. And I think we all have moments like that where we bump into these perceived limitations. They're not real limits. Like, for example, no matter how hard I worked, I was never going to be an Olympic gymnast. But I do think sometimes perceived limits, like you're not big enough to do this sport, can feel real and insurmountable. And I attribute my willingness to push through some of those limits, whether they're real or imposed or perceived, to my early years in Kansas, growing up with my brother. He really put in place the building blocks of toughness and competitiveness that put me on the road to the Olympics. So Liz asked me to talk a little bit about the difference between the 1988 Olympics in Seoul, South Korea, and the 1992 Games in Barcelona. And that just got me reflecting on those years, and they were very different experiences. I should say first that I really loved rowing. I just loved every day of it. I would wake up excited to go out there and row. And I loved being in the boats, on the water with my friends. I loved that feeling of focus and absolute clarity of, here's the starting line, here's the finish line, here's your lane. Like it was just a really kind of beautiful time of life. And I felt incredibly privileged to be part of both collegiate rowing and Olympic rowing. And the women that I rowed with remain some of my really, truly my closest friends. We stood by each other when we got married. We were godmothers to each other's children. And it was just a magical time for all of us. But I have to admit, when I made the Olympic team heading off to Seoul, I had a little bit of disappointment because I wanted to go to the real Olympics, which in my mind were held in Europe. And but I'll never forget landing in Seoul, and I think we got in a bus and drove to the Olympic Village from the airport. And we drove along the beautiful Han River, which runs all through Seoul. And I caught sight of a double rainbow over the river. And it was just so beautiful. And it was really just the start of what turned out to be an incredibly beautiful experience in that city, including meeting my husband, Seaton Huntington, who was there cheering on his brother, Chris, who was also on the team. But in the Athletes Village, I met a lot of people from all over the world, and they were people who, we could barely speak to each other, but it was clear that we'd all been living such similar lives, that we had so much in common, training pretty much every waking moment and being focused on our goals. And I think being in Korea was this real awakening to me. Even though it felt like such a foreign place, it drove home that extraordinary beauty and truly universal shared experience that is the Olympics. So I was in a boat of 8 women that year, and our boat had won a silver medal at the World Championships the year before. So we were a medal favorite, but we didn't have a good race. In Seoul, we placed 6th. And I think in the first week or so after the games, I decided I wanted to train for 4 more years and try again for a medal. And that I wanted to row, instead of being in an 8, I wanted to row in a pair with just one other person, where I'd have more control over the outcomes. So when it came time to go to Barcelona in 1992, I was just all business. I don't remember the drive from the airport. Like, I was just so focused. I don't remember too many things about it. I was just there focused on winning a gold medal, period. And I'd often thought of all those gold medal Olympic giants like Mark Spitz, Tommy Smith, Janet Evans, Joan Benoit. And I wondered what my time stepping onto the gold medal platform would be. I'd train 5 or 6 hours a day, 2 or 3 times a day for 4 years. We'd have maybe a rare afternoon off every couple of weeks. It was a really intense time of training. And Stephanie and I, my rowing partner, we put in a great race. I'd say it was our best race ever, but we won a bronze, not a gold. And initially I was disappointed, but so many of my family had traveled to Barcelona, including my parents, my aunts, uncles, cousins, and my beloved brother. And they really celebrated my performance, and I'm grateful to them for helping me realize that I'd given it everything I had and that I should feel content with my achievement. So Liz also asked me to talk about, well, I think this was the intention of your question. You asked me to talk about what's changed since I was at the Olympics, more than 25 years ago. And I mean, it's one of those things, like everything in life, like so much has changed and nothing has changed. But particularly this year, I think it's been an extremely unusual year because of COVID. The Olympics were delayed by a year. And then they were also the athlete, there were no spectators allowed at the Olympics. And so I was really struck by the challenges of the Olympic athletes in Tokyo, just having to compete without their families or loved ones around them. I can't imagine how hard that was. And then just from a training perspective, to have, you really build over the years, you build to peak on that day of your race, and to have to kind of reformulate all that training and continue to train and try to peak again a year later, I think must have been incredibly challenging for people. I was also really struck watching the Olympics and just the lead up to the Olympics by the bright media spotlight on the women athletes. I think it's different from what it looked like in my day when there was a spotlight on women athletes, but usually as kind of the cute little darlings. And women like Simone Biles, the gymnast, and Naomi Osaka, they garnered a lot of media attention, and I thought it was wonderful. And their incredible athletic prowess was celebrated. And but I couldn't help but also notice that they really were also pressured to be, in addition to being perfect athletes, they were pressured to be spokespeople for racial equity and for mental health advocacy. And I think that it's kind of a double-edged sword. Like, it's a really hard-won privilege for these women to have the public attention and to have their accomplishments recognized, but it's also a lot of pressure on athletes to have to fill these other roles. I think it showed in their performances. So I can't help but contrast, my experience and their experience with the experience of women who came just a generation before me and 2 generations before them. Women who I assume are like many of you listening today. And I think of my Aunt Liz. She grew up with my dad in Coffeyville, Kansas they had 2 other brothers, and they were all swimmers growing up. She was an excellent swimmer, and she loved it. But when she turned 13, she had to quit, as did all the girls. And I've talked to her about that, and she said no one really said why explicitly. It was just that she was becoming a woman, and being a competitive athlete wasn't part of what being a woman entailed. And so from then on out, instead of going to practices and going to swimming meets, she sat in the stands with her mom and cheered on her brothers. And she said she felt like her life was really marked by that loss of opportunity, that, that experience of being a spectator and not a participant. And she told me an example of, like, she was a teacher her whole life and she wanted to run for the school board, but somehow it ended up that her husband ran for the school board and she helped campaign for him. And, she just felt that it changed her sense of herself and what was possible for her. So what changed in our country and what made sports available and possible for women after my aunt's generation is that Title IX of the 1972 Education Amendments passed. And so that was 1972, the same year that I started rowing on the Manhattan Marlins. Title IX started requiring schools that received any federal funds to provide equitable sports opportunities for girls and women. And it didn't happen immediately, but Title IX really has changed the sports landscape, and just providing all kinds of mandated opportunities for girls and women. And now girls grow up without any awareness that sports were not available or condoned for girls. It's shifted incredibly quickly. And I think it's changed many women's lives, including my own. And when I talk about my own athletic experience or about women's Olympic sports, I have to pay tribute to my aunt's generation and my mom's generation and the women who came before them. Women like, I'm assuming many of you in the audience, they fought for Title IX and they made it possible for the girls and women who came after them, including me and my daughter, to have athletic experiences that really shaped our young lives and continue to inform our adult lives in incredibly positive ways. So thank you. Well, those are my remarks, Liz. I don't know if you want to jump into questions or what your thoughts.
Does anybody here have a question for Anna?
Yeah, what year did you graduate?
What year did you graduate, from high school or college?
High school.
I graduated in 1982. Yeah.
From Manhattan High?
That's right, Manhattan High. Yep, I spent all my childhood years in Manhattan. And yeah.
Yeah, Joyce. Are you doing anything athletic right now? Did you continue on?
I started rowing again recently. I'm living in Minneapolis now, and they have a rowing team. So I started rowing with a group of other women, and I still run and bike and hike. And so I swim a lot. I love swimming. That's really my go-to sport. I'm gonna train to be a yoga instructor. That's my next challenge. I feel like that'll be a good sport to age with. So
What gets you up and doing? I mean, how do you motivate yourself to do it? What motivates you? She said, how do you motivate yourself to be so physically active?
To be active. I mean, that is such a good question. I think for me, it's partly habit. I just did it all those years, and I just don't. So I think that helps a lot. Just having, we're all kind of shaped by our habits in some way, and mood. Like, it just has such a marked improvement on my mood when I'm physically active, and I can feel myself get kind of crabby and blue when I'm not. So that is a real incentive for me to be active. I hope that's helpful.
Any other questions? Well, Anne, I wanted to tell you, one of the, it's been striking to me, the year 1972.
Yeah.
how many references you've made to that year and things that happened in that year that impacted
Mhm.
your personal experience. So that's really
Yeah.
good to me, you know.
You've got a
starting
good ear
to-
for themes, Liz.
Yes, yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah, okay. And then I remember too, I remember going, I don't think we got very good TV reception where I lived when I was 7. We lived up on the hill next to Master Teacher. I don't know if you know where that is.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter if you know. But I would see the Olympics when we would go over to the Thamer's house. If you remember Mr. Thamer, the driving instructor.
Yes, yeah.
That's where I got to see Mark Spitz
Oh,
and all those things, and just I remember how that just ignited a fascination for me with the Olympics. So it was really fun to hear you comment about him and just
Yeah.
just that whole. And that was the one in Munich, right? Where sadly they had the
Yeah, 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 that's right, exactly.
experience. So just how formative some of those collective experiences that we have.
Interesting. We must have been very impressionable at that age too, you know, it's, yeah.
Okay, so we have a question from Don.
Once one has individualized and realized during the training and coaching from being at such a young age, how is the qualification of being so athletic falling into the roboticism of how the human body is? So more or less, how does the coach know, more or less, to be invited to start that trial of continuing on to go to the Olympics? So how does that start, more or less?
That's such a good question. I think it's different for every sport, you know. There are feeder systems and they work differently in every sport. In the sport of rowing, the way it worked was, and I think it continues to work this way, high performing collegiate rowers would be invited to a training camp, and at the training camp the coach would put you through a variety of kind of performance tests, both on the water and off the water, to evaluate your capacity and your potential, and so it's pretty subjective in a lot of ways. You know, it really does turn on the coach's opinions and their experience, at least initially. There's something called seat racing. So I don't know if you guys have seen rowing. And Liz, there is, I can send you a link to my race, if that, you know, the 1992 race, like if you wanted to.
Great. Yeah, please do.
Yeah, I'll find that, because it's not a sport that you see a whole lot in the Midwest, so it's kind of hard for people to picture. But anyway, you change people from one, you switch people among boat, you have a race, and then judge the margin of difference, and you switch one person with one other person between the boats and race again. And if the margin changes, that's attributed to, you know, the two folks that got switched. So that's the supposedly objective way of measuring a person's rowing performance. But there's also a lot of qualifying races along the way that so, you know, there's like trials, basically Olympic trial races that also determine who gets to go to the Olympics. So it's kind of a mix of coaches identifying and fostering talent, and then doors being open along the way where people can come in who haven't made it onto those coaches' radar.
So it's few far in between of selective being so athletic and falling into where the trials and reaching nationals, and of course the steps and process to reach each goal to achieve to be an Olympian.
Yeah.
But that's amazing to be third ranked in the world. It's amazing.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
It really is. Regardless of what sport, it's amazing.
Thank you. I mean, it was just a wonderful experience. It was just, I can't describe it's just so outside of what real life generally is. Life is so much about balancing and compromising and making decisions between this and that and putting out fires. And in those training years, it's just like your goal is so clear. That's all, you just put everything aside for that goal. And I just loved that. That really speaks to the way my mind works, I think, just that kind of black and white approach. So I really, really loved it and feel very lucky to have had that opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Another question, two questions actually. The night before, did you sleep at all? That's number one. And then if like you were rowing faster than somebody else, do you know that at the time or do you see it afterwards? And are you mad at the other person if they're going slower than you want or not?
So I can talk about sleeping. I did sleep because, those were those young years when you just sleep well. But I will say, I think I had diarrhea for about 2 years. I was just nervous all the time. It was just so intense, just such an intense time. And
Joyous diarrhea, since it was such a joyous time.
Fun comes in different packages. I don't know what to say. And then I'm sorry, I forgot what the next question was.
If you're going faster than the person beside you, are you upset with them at the time, or do you not even know until it's over?
I think part of her question too is, how aware are you of the other boats in the race?
Yeah.
That part of it. And then are you talking about the partner?
Yeah.
If you're, and then as far as you and your partner being in sync, how did you handle that if you were in a racing situation and you got out of sync? How did you handle your frustrations?
That's a good question. As far as like when you're on a race course, coaches will always say, eyes in the boat, eyes in the boat, eyes in the boat. You're not supposed to be looking around. You just don't want any excess body motion whatsoever. You don't want to be distracted. So you can see out of your peripheral vision where other boats are. If you're in a boat with a coxswain, that's the small person who steers the boat, then they're also speaking to you and keeping you in sync and telling you where the other boats are. In our boat, in the pair, we didn't have a coxswain. It was just the two of us. So we were just really focused on what was happening in our boat. We had a race plan, and we kind of had a strategy for every little section of that race, and that's what we were focused on executing. And as far as the like your awareness of how hard other people are pulling, I really had a lesson about that early in my career. As maybe even my first year of rowing, I think everybody, so these boats are pretty narrow. They're maybe 14, 16 inches wide. You sit on a little wooden seat and it slides back and forth. So you drive with your legs, swing with your back, and pull with your arms. It's an all body activity. And but the boats are really narrow. You have these long oars out to the side, and they're tippy. The boats are very tippy. And when they, when people are rowing well and rowing in sync, it's beautiful. It's just like, you just feel this sense of floating and glide, and you can pull as hard as you want. And it's just, it's called swing. And, it's just a lovely feeling. but of course you don't get a lot of that when you're first learning. And I think when you're first learning, your inclination is always to think, well, I'm doing it right. Why aren't they doing it right? You know, you're making the boat tippy, or you're not pulling hard enough. And that's the problem. And eventually you come to this realization that you can't do anything about that. You can only control yourself. And you know, the most you can contribute is to do your best, and trying to focus on coaching or analyzing or criticizing anyone else only takes away from you contributing your best. So I think that you know, I'd say that that's a lesson that, like, you, of course you have to relearn that. You know, I became aware of that early on and had to relearn it, and I probably continue to have to relearn that in life, you know. That really it's just, we're really in charge of ourselves, period. You know. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Did you ever train in Minnesota, off of Lake Superior?
I never have. No, I don't know if there is rowing on Lake Superior. I have been rowing on the Mississippi River. And then, you know, there's no shortage of small lakes around here that people row on. So
I was in Duluth, last month. And every day I would go down to the, walkway, look down at Lake Superior, and there was a lot of people rowing.
oh, I had no idea about that. Maybe it was a regatta. It must have been a race if it was so many boats at one time.
You said you were in Duluth, Herb, you said you were in Duluth? Okay.
It looked like a lot of it was recreational, but every now and then I would see someone that looked like they were very, very skilled in doing some training.
Well, that's such a beautiful city, Duluth, and right on the water there. But I didn't realize there was rowing there. But I bet there is. It might have been a regatta, you know, and it might have even been kind of just recreational rowers competing. So I was telling my closest friend retired, she's a doctor and she retired yesterday, and we were talking, and she was telling me about how, you know, she'd planned this she just retired yesterday. So yesterday was her last day of work. And she was telling me how she'd planned every minute of it and knew how it was going to go. And then the night before, she ended up with a nail in her tire, and her husband like had to get up early and go and get her tire fixed, and you know, it just kind of threw off the whole day. But she's like, and that's just how life is, and and that's okay. Like, you know, lots of unplanned things happen, and it reminded me, and I told her this story of the morning of the Olympics in Barcelona. We had, so you have a race start time, and you really work back from that time. Like, okay, our warm up takes 45 minutes. So we need to have our hands on the boat 10 minutes before that, so we can carry the boat down, and we need to start stretching, you know, 45 minutes before that, and we need to have breakfast an hour before that, and we should wake up at whatever time so we can have coffee, and like, you just plan the whole day minute by minute. So so my rowing partner and I, we shared a room at the, I can't remember, it must have been like a hotel that we were in, I can't quite remember. And she would always wake up a little bit earlier than I would. She was just that kind of, you know, hyper organized person and wanted a little bit more time. So she woke up a little bit early, and she came. And so instead of waking up to my alarm that morning, I woke up to Stephanie jostling me awake very gently and saying, Anna, I was cleaning my ears and the cotton on the Q-tip got stuck in my ear. And can you go find that? She's like, I can't row like this. Like, it's too weird. Everything sounds weird. Can you go find the doctor and have him come and take this cotton out of my ear? And so, you know, I had to go find the poor doctor, and because there was a team doctor, you know, there's always a team doctor for all kinds of things. I'm sure he wasn't expecting to have to take cotton out of anybody's ear, but he came and did that, and our day got underway. But it was just such a moment of recognizing, you know, just in some ways our humanity. I mean, even at that moment of like, here we are at our peak life experience, some funny little thing like that just comes in and makes you realize that you can't plan or control everything, or much anyway.
Any more questions or comments? Okay, one more.
One quickie. What does your brother that gave you all that trouble say to you now?
Well, that's such a good question. I mean, I love my brother, and he loves me, and he's so proud of me, and always tells me so. And you know, I mean, we were just kids, and he was just a wild little guy, and we grew up, and I'm just so grateful that we have each other. You know, we've really gotten each other through quite a lot in life, and we're very different, but I'm really, really grateful for his love and his friendship.
Do you think you will ever coach anybody in the Olympics?
No, I don't. I think, I mean, I do like coaching. But I think, you know, that's probably a path that I would have had to have gotten on much earlier in life, you know, in order for that to happen. I could see coaching some younger kids or some masters rowers or something like that, but not at that high level. I have friends who do it still, but.
Well, I'd just like to say that when we lived in Manhattan, I was a letter carrier for many years here, and I got to deliver mail to your house. I saw you as a young girl.
Oh, cool.
Oh my goodness.
Your mailman is here, Anna.
Oh, thank you. Oh, I'm really touched by that. That is such a Manhattan story. It's just, we're all so connected to each other there. It's such a wonderful thing, you know?
Yeah. What do you remember about Seoul and the other one you were at? What was there something you took away from those cities?
Yeah, did you go to the opening ceremonies, Anna?
Yes, I did. I did go to the opening ceremonies both times. And that's just kind of a surreal experience. You know, you after you make the Olympic team, you get, I'm trying to remember, I think, so when I made the Olympic team in 1988, I was at a training camp in Seattle, and they flew, that was for the Seoul Olympics. So they flew us down to Los Angeles, where they were bringing in all the new Olympic athletes to be like outfitted, and you get, you know, you get your racing uniform, you get your medals ceremony uniform, you get your opening ceremony uniform, you get 16 other things that, you know, like t-shirts and jackets and watches and bags and suitcases and hats, and like they just completely outfit you. I think in many cases it's from the corporate sponsors, you know, their goods that they're sharing with the athletes. And so for the opening ceremonies, you know, you have, and you see it when you watch them, you see all the athletes in their matching uniforms. And so you get into your matching uniform and everybody lines up, and you know, you march into that stadium and it's just a wall of sound, and you know your family's up there watching you, and it's just an incredibly emotional time. And it is a moment of celebration that everybody shares, like no matter what your performance is, no matter how your races go, you all share that time together where we're celebrating what you know, we're celebrating that Olympic spirit, and it's really just a lovely experience. I think I'm trying to remember, you know, Barcelona. I would love to go back to Barcelona. I don't know if anybody's been to Barcelona, but what an amazing city, just beautiful, beautiful city. And I feel lucky because you know, the Olympics run over a 2-week period, and rowing happens in the first week. All the races take place in the first week, and then, but all the athletes get to stay, and you get basically like a pass to go into any of the other Olympic events that you want to go to. And so it's just that second week was just, you know, after those years of living like such a regimented life, it was just such a fun time of running around and seeing the city and seeing the other events and meeting all kinds of people. And that was just a lovely time. And it was in Seoul in the second week that I met my husband, Stuart. So, but we didn't get married until after I was done rowing, because I didn't have time.
Well, this has really been wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you all so much. And
Yeah, this is really special, and it's neat. It's fun for me personally just to get to hear some of the stuff that you've done. And I guess one of the things that we didn't address, which is okay, maybe you'll come back and talk to us again about your America's Cup experience. That might be fun too.
well, I'm sorry, I missed
Oh, the yacht that you were on.
Oh, yeah. I can come back and talk about that if you like. Sure.
Okay.
Yeah,
Deal.
I'd be happy to. Well, thank you all so very much, Liz. It was just wonderful to see you. Wonderful to thank you. And a special thank you to my mail carrier. I'm just so touched by that.
Aw, so sweet. Come on, blow me kiss.
There might be a matching story with that when I was a kid.
Yeah, thanks, Anna.
Thank you, Liz. Take
Okay,
care.
have a
Great to
Thank
see
you.
you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
So.
Now,